So the event tonight is about a hugely important issue, and I think will generate a lot of discussion. Personally, I find it particularly concerning that with the current situation in Afghanistan, the government is able to use its warm welcome to a small number of Afghan refugees as a smokescreen to disguise the fact that this bill is set to turn an already hostile environment into a sub-zero one. So it promises to be a very full evening, so I shall just briefly outline the plan. We're expecting the event to last up to about an hour and a half. I'll give a brief introduction to the work of Freedom from Torture nationally and locally, and Serafina will tell you about Bristol Star before introducing our panel of eminent speakers. They'll each give a short presentation of about 15 minutes, after which we'll be opening up the floor to questions from the audience via the chat function. So please type in your questions as you go along. So you'll have noticed that with the agreement of our speakers, we're recording the event for later distribution. So Freedom from Torture, originally called the Medical Foundation, provides support to survivors of torture in a variety of ways, operating from its 5 centres in London, Birmingham, Newcastle, Manchester and Glasgow. Experts provide detailed medico-legal reports to support people's asylum applications. Therapy is provided one-to-one and or through less formal means, such as creative writing, gardening and bread-making groups. Advocacy and self-advocacy are supported through the Survivors Speak Out group. Practical help is given to survivors to get by day to day. Country reports based on the testimony of survivors are produced to support campaigning nationally and internationally. And Freedom from Torture are obviously currently very actively campaigning along with the Together with Refugees network to ensure that the Nationality and Borders Bill is amended. So as a local group, our main remits are awareness raising and fundraising, although we're very fortunate to have Alison on the committee who prepares medico-legal reports, Judy, who is the Director of Trauma Foundation Southwest, who provide therapy locally to refugees and asylum seekers, and Faik, who has been involved in health assessments for unaccompanied asylum-seeking young people. So I will hand over now to Serafina to tell you about STAR and introduce the panel members.
Hello, I'm Serafina and I'm a student at the University of Bristol and President of the Society Student Action for Refugees for the Bristol branch. STAR is a national network of students advocating for refugees and asylum seekers whilst raising awareness about the issues that face them. At Bristol STAR, we run a range of volunteering projects. We have things from Homework Club, which is in collaboration with the Somali Resource Centre, where we run a weekly homework club where university students support young children from sanctuary-seeking backgrounds with their schoolwork. In this last year, we won the most impactful volunteering project award for it out of all of the STAR National. We managed to help 100 kids weekly with their homework and raised £1,000 to help buy laptops and tablets for the children. And then another volunteering project we run is the Brunel Mentoring Scheme, which is in collaboration with the Brunel Academy. We pair secondary school and sixth form students from sanctuary-seeking backgrounds with university students who help them with schoolwork, university applications and general support. We also run the Conversation Club, which is in collaboration with the City Council. We send volunteers to conversation clubs that help young adults and adults seeking sanctuary to practice their English in a safe, informal and non-judgmental environment. We also have 2 subcommittees of a campaigns team and a legal fund team. The legal fund team provides financial aid to sanctuary scholars at the University of Bristol who are facing legal fees. In the last year, we raised over £8,000 and hosted 23 events, and we hope to continue this on with this year, particularly with this lovely event that we've organised. Now to move on to our brilliant guest speakers, who we're so happy to have with us today. First up, we have Sheila Reynolds, who is the Head of Asylum Advocacy at Freedom from Torture. She has worked with refugees and asylum seekers for over 10 years as a researcher, a policy expert and a campaigner. Next, we have Thangan Debonair, who is the MP for Bristol West and is the previous chair of the all-party parliamentary group on refugees. And finally, we'll have Angela, who is a member of One Strong Voice, which is an organisation creating the first coalition of campaigners with lived experience of the immigration and asylum system. Now, up first, we'll have Sheila to talk to you a bit more.
Thanks, Serafina. And thank you so much for inviting me to come and talk today. It's a real pleasure and it's great to be on the panel with such esteemed colleagues. As Serafina said, my name is Sheila. I'm the head of asylum advocacy at Freedom from Torture. Linda's already explained a bit about what Freedom from Torture does. In summary, we're a human rights charity that also provides therapeutic rehabilitation services to torture survivors, most of whom are in the asylum system or have refugee status. Alongside this work, we also campaign to end torture globally and to improve the lives of torture survivors as asylum seekers in the UK. Now, it's really great to have the opportunity to come and talk to you all about the bill, because local activists and networks are going to be central to how this bill and the wider political climate that surrounds it will ultimately be defeated. Now, I'm going to give a very sort of quick overview of the bill and a little bit of background to introduce it. It was brought in July of this year, following what was a very heavily criticised public consultation on the government's new plan for immigration policy statement. The bill's now at committee stage, which means it's being considered by a small group of MPs, and they're going to start going through the bill clause by clause, considering amendments very, very shortly. I'm going to run through what I think are some of the most important parts of the bill from Freedom from Torture's point of view. I won't cover everything, it's a huge bill. And then I'm going to talk about what I think you guys could do as activists to defend the rights of refugees in the face of what is arguably the greatest attack on access to asylum in the UK in a generation. I can't see if my slides are up, Mark, but I can carry on. Oh, the magic. Thank you. Oh, thank you very much. Okay, great. Next slide, please. So if you only take away 3 messages concerning the bill from this event tonight, let them be these. The bill effectively tortures the Refugee Convention and rolls the clock back over 70 years to a time when persecuted minorities died in concentration camps for want of a visa that would get them to safety. It's as bad as that. The convention was expressly drafted to fill that gap, to ensure that those moving without prior authorization would not be punished on arrival in a safe country, and that they would have access to sanctuary if they needed it. Now, the bill effectively withdraws that guarantee. The second message I want you to take away is that the bill won't do what it claims to do. It won't increase the fairness and efficiency of the asylum system. It won't deter illegal entry into the UK or break the business model of people smuggling networks. And it won't enable the removal from the UK of those with no right to be here. What it will do is it will deny refugees access to protection in the UK. It will criminalise those who come here seeking safety. It will increase the risk of return to persecution. It will prolong the uncertainty of those awaiting a decision on their asylum claim. It will deny refugees the stability of secure status, welfare support, and family unity. It will isolate refugees in camps in the UK and offshore, and it will cripple the asylum system with delays, inefficiencies, and errors. And the third message I want you to take away is that the British people don't want this inhumane bill. The public consultation on the new plan for immigration showed us that. The public reaction to the situation in Afghanistan showed us that. Most people want an approach that is kinder, fairer, and more effective. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's in the bill, but I'm not going to go clause by clause because there are so many. I am going to describe the 4 main areas of interest within part 2 of the bill, which is the bit that covers asylum. And these 4 areas are the creation of second-class refugees, the accelerated and the proposals to create accelerated and unfair asylum decision-making. The third one is around accommodation, and the 4th is around proposals related to offshoring. So the first thing to think about is what the bill is doing to create this concept of second-class refugees. Now, this is the backbone that runs through the bill. For the first time, how you arrive in and enter the UK will impact on whether and how your asylum claim progresses and what status you'll receive in the UK if that claim is successful. The bill will effectively create a subcategory of refugees whose rights and entitlements in the UK will be determined not by what they fled, but how they got here. Now, this is addressed through three key parts of the bill that are listed on this slide. The first part is around criminalisation. So the bill seeks to expand the existing offence of knowingly entering the UK without leave to create a new offence of unlawful arrival, in other words, arriving without a visa. Now, this is because under current legislation, asylum seekers arriving irregularly and then passing through immigration control are not deemed to have committed an offence. So what the government appears to have in mind is the targeting of small boat arrivals, suggesting that this amendment is intended to allow for the prosecution of those who are stopped in UK territorial water and brought to the UK, but have not yet technically entered the country. Now, the actual effect of this is likely to be much wider, as under the proposals in the bill, any asylum seeker who's unable to secure entry permission before fleeing persecution and who then arrives in the UK will have committed an offence. And importantly, the bill includes no statutory defence to an individual who is later recognised as a refugee. Now, this new offence of unlawful arrival is expressly designed to penalise refugees based on their mode of arrival. By criminalising the very act of seeking asylum in the UK, this proposal is clearly in breach of the Refugee Convention, which was drafted to protect refugees moving irregularly. It's worth bearing in mind that the only way to secure entry clearance is to qualify for a visa category. There is no visa category for someone who wishes to enter the UK for the purpose of seeking asylum, and you must be present on UK territory in order to apply for asylum. 90% of those who are granted asylum in the UK are from countries whose nationals must get a visa to enter the UK. There's no legal way for these people to travel to seek protection in the UK. It's not surprising that 60% of asylum claims are made by those entering irregularly. Now, the second part of this area of the bill concerns inadmissibility. What the bill's doing is it's putting into primary legislation provisions that already exist and are already happening in the UK since the start of this year. These provisions allow the government to rule that a claim for asylum will not be heard here, no matter how valid the case, if they suspect the applicant has travelled through or has a connection to a safe third country where they could have claimed asylum. The government will then seek to remove that applicant to any safe country that agrees to receive them, even if they have no connection to it. If a return agreement can't be secured within the reasonable timeframe, and at the moment that's set at around 6 months, the asylum claim will finally be admitted to the UK asylum system. Now, these cases, if granted, will form the majority of the second-class refugees that I'm going to talk about in a moment. Now, of course, safe third country process is nothing new, but since we left Europe, these provisions now exist effectively in a vacuum, with no international agreements, safeguards or standards that are going to guarantee the protection of the applicant from a violation of their human rights. It's also worth bearing in mind that officially we have no readmission agreements, so we can't return anyone to a safe third country. In the first 6 months of the operation of this policy, so the first 6 months of this year, more than 4,500 people were issued with a notice of intent. And this is the first stage in the inadmissibility process. 7 of those were finally declared inadmissible, but none of them were returned anywhere. So these provisions do not make the process more fair or efficient or act as a deterrent. What they do is they impose a prolonged period of limbo and anxiety upon a refugee who has come seeking nothing more than safety. Now, the final part of this theme is around differentiation. As I said earlier, those that are admitted to the UK asylum system will, if this bill is passed, likely be classified as a second-class refugee. This is because the bill introduces the new and inhumane and most likely unlawful concept of Group 1 and Group 2 refugees. Someone is a Group 1 refugee if they've come to the UK directly from a country or territory where their life or freedom was threatened, and they've presented themselves without delay to the authorities. If these conditions are not met, then the person will be a Group 2 refugee. So this proposal is designed to enable the Home Office to treat people differently after they've established their status as refugees and their entitlement to remain in the UK. It's a really important point to note. As a consequence of this proposal, Group 2 refugees may be granted temporary protection status with limited leave to remain, most likely up to about 30 months, with no automatic path to settlement, with limited family reunion rights and possibly no recourse to public funds. Now, what that is going to look like in practice is that some refugees will experience significant delay or a complete denial of the opportunity to settle in the UK. These same refugees will have to make repeated applications to renew their status and entitlement to remain. During this period, they'll have no access to welfare support and they may have no family. Now, our concern is that this proposal could result in many thousands more people per year living in poverty and driven into debt and exploitation. We believe this is likely to drive more people into conditions of forced labour, trafficking and abuse. So the second area that I'm going to talk about relates to accelerated and unfair asylum decision making. So the proposals that we believe are going to create that situation. These elements of the bill are quite technical, but they are important sections to understand because they effectively speed up the process while simultaneously withdrawing the safeguards that protect the most vulnerable who struggle with disclosure, particularly within a tight deadline. There's a series of clauses that basically create a requirement for asylum applicants to submit evidence by a specified date. And if the evidence is submitted after that date, they must present a statement setting out the reasons for this. Now, in order to meet this requirement, all refugees are going to need really good quality legal advice and representation, stable and secure housing, access to high quality interpreting services, medical care, and a range of other expert support, much of which is completely outside their control. Now, the risk here is that a traumatized or confused individual is going to be presented with a piece of paper, the importance of which they're in no state to comprehend, and which is setting a deadline that they can't hope to meet, which then creates a bureaucratic barrier to that person's claim being fully and fairly considered. There then follows a series of clauses that direct decision makers, including immigration judges on appeal, to exclude or to give less weight to evidence or to reject the credibility, so the believability of a claimant on the basis that the submissions were made after the deadline. Now, that exclusion is not on the basis of any assessment of the relevance of that evidence or the truthfulness of the claimant. It's entirely arbitrary. This can only increase the likelihood that some people with good asylum claims will not get a fair hearing and will risk being refused. Now, these people in very real fear of persecution and for very good reason are not going to accept to return to torture or persecution. Also linked to this are some additional clauses concerning appeal rights and processes. I'm not going to go into those, but there is an important one related to detention and what looks like the return of the detained fast track. Again, all of this range of appeals provisions seek to speed up the process significantly. But it's really, really disturbing that this government seems to think that appeals from detention can be conducted at an even faster pace than others. This shows a complete failure to understand that detention itself acts as an impediment to effective engagement with an appeal process. Next slide, please. So the third area that I want to talk about is accommodation. And the bill allows for the use of certain types of accommodation to house certain cohorts of asylum seekers and refused asylum seekers, including the use of accommodation centres. Now, the prospect here is that people will be effectively held in quite isolated conditions, very similar to detention, potentially, in large-scale institutions, rather than in housing in communities where they can get the practical support they need in order to rebuild their lives. We believe that doing this is going to significantly reduce any capacity to engage effectively with the asylum system, whether that's as a direct result of the geographical isolation or as a result of the emotional and psychological impact of living in that kind of accommodation. Next slide, please. So the final theme that I want to mention is offshoring. So the bill includes provisions for the removal of asylum seekers from the UK while their claim is pending for the purpose of offshore processing. Now, this means transporting people who are seeking asylum from the UK to another country to be held while their asylum claim is determined. There's no detail in the bill around where the claimants may be sent or who would do the processing, what conditions or safeguards might apply, or indeed what would happen to those who are recognised as refugees under this process. Now, it's clearly inspired by the policy that's been pursued by Australia on Manus and Nauru Islands. of creating an environment that's so incredibly hostile, so awful, that it's actually preferable to remain in a country of persecution or insecurity, or indeed that's the intention behind it. In reality, the suffering inflicted on those who are processed, who have been processed offshore under the Australian model, has been enormous, with overwhelming evidence of abuse, including sexual abuse, mental health trauma, and death resulting from suicide and neglect. Next slide, please. Now, there's already been mention of the context with Afghanistan, and quite clearly the crisis there and the evacuation that followed, as well as the government's very warm words of welcome towards the refugees involved in that, highlight just how illogical and irrational the proposals in this bill are. Just imagine, it's quite possible that two neighbours from Kabul with an identical need for protection will be treated differently purely because one of them was able to get on an evacuation flight and one of them was left behind and had to travel irregularly to seek protection in the UK. It doesn't make sense. Next slide, please. So this has been a bit of a bleak presentation, I'm sorry, but I'm going to try and end on a high note with some possible campaigning activities that are coming up that Freedom from Torture is involved in, and that we hope you can be too. We have got a serious fight on our hands with this bill. The government's got a huge majority in Parliament that it can use to push through the bill. But we know that the combined pressure of citizens like yourselves coming together through networks like this in coordinated action can be incredibly powerful force for change. Local action, as I said at the start, is so important right now. We need to demonstrate that there is public support for a more compassionate approach to asylum. And this needs to be loud and clear at both a local and national level while MPs discuss the bill. So what can you do? I've got a list of things there on the slide. Linda has already mentioned Together with Refugees. This is a coalition of over 300 national and local organisations which launched earlier this year to campaign for better treatment of refugees. And it is very focused on the bill at the moment. The link is on the slide. I will also put it in the chat once I'm finished. Please do take a look. Organisations of all sizes and shapes can join, and you're very welcome. Second thing you could do, you could write to your MP. It's incredibly important that your MP understands your concerns about the bill, and if possible, has the chance to meet with you to talk about it. I'm going to include a link to the Together with Refugees template letter for contacting your MP in the chat as well. You could sign Freedom from Torture's petition. You'd be joining over 50,000 people who've signed it already and telling Priti Patel that we don't want her anti-refugee bill. Again, I'll put the link to the petition in the chat. You could join the Rights Raid Week of Action. So this is coming up on the 10th to the 17th of October, and it's led by Amnesty. It's a coalition that's seeking to raise awareness of a range of proposed legislation that threatens to undermine fundamental human rights, including the Borders Bill, but also the Policing Bill and the review of the Human Rights Act. You could also join the Anti-Refugee Bill Week of Action. So this is the following week. There's a lot of stuff coming up in October. So the week of 18th to 24th of October, there's going to be activities in towns and cities up and down the country. Again, I'll put a link for that. But during this week of action, there's going to be a Refugees Welcome Rally on the 20th of October. And this will take place in Parliament Square and is open to all. There's going to be plenty of lived experience speakers, and you can arrange to meet your MP on the day. And on the same day, or at least in the same week, Together with Refugees is encouraging groups to organise a Show Your Heart mobilisation event. So I will put the link for the Together with Refugees campaign pack in the chat as well, so you can have a look at that. Whatever you do, please let everyone know about it, and please remember to use the hashtags Together with Refugees and Who We Are so that we can find it easily. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to seeing you at one of the events in October. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Now we're going to be moving on to Thangam.
Hello, my name's Thangam Debonair. I'm the MP for Bristol West, and although I am in the Shadow Cabinet as the Shadow Leader of the House of Commons, I'm speaking to you today very much as a local constituency MP, as I'm not in the front bench Home Office team, but I have spoken to my colleague Bambos Charalambos, who's leading for us on this bill. And I've been following it very closely. Obviously, this is a vile bill, which we've already voted against at second reading. It's in committee stage, as Styler says, at the moment. And Bambos is going through the line by line work as our lead, as well as the other committee members. We're going to be pushing a lot of amendments. Some of them we won't vote on at committee stage, then will actually be voted on at later stages. I'm very happy to discuss some of the process stuff if that's of interest to people. But I wanted to talk particularly about the politics and what that's going to mean for the sort of caseload which an MP like myself typically has. I've just done a quick search on my caseworker system, and between 1st of April 2020 and the 1st of April 2021, we opened 259 immigration cases alone. So that's the biggest category in my case, single category of topic in my caseload. That's 259. I have the equivalent of one full-time caseworker, 2 part-timers, and me. And that's just one part of my caseload, but it is the biggest part. And I'm just scanning through these. I can see that if this bill goes through unamended, which I'm afraid to say could happen, the various aspects that have just been described already by the previous speaker, they will mean critically, as far as I can see, that there will be no MP who can help people. If they are offshored, dreadful term, they will not have an MP. If they are put in a detention centre, the equivalent of a detention centre, they may have an MP, but it may be very difficult for that MP to advocate for them. The 259 people that I advocated for and my caseworkers over the course of that year, if they hadn't been living in Bristol West, I would have had no legal right to advocate on their behalf and no actual means. If I write to the Home Office about any asylum seeker or refugee other than the ones who are registered to live in my constituency, I will get no assistance. I don't get a lot of assistance even when they do, but I can't advocate on behalf of someone who's not in my constituency, and someone who's offshored will therefore have no MP. And without that sort of advocacy, I can absolutely 100% guarantee that people will be badly treated, even more badly treated. So, for instance, even under the current system where we have asylum accommodation, it's not the greatest always, but it is at least in communities, near local organisations, with people who can provide support and help. And they have an MP, and that MP can get information at the Home Office. That MP can keep on bothering the Home Office. And we often get results just in terms of the cases that have been lost down the back of a filing cabinet. And I'm really not making that up. Now, without that, my concern is that there will be no political representative to advocate. And whilst you also need a lawyer, without the representation of an MP, there are plenty of stages where no progress can otherwise be made, and lawyers will advise usually their clients, this is the time you need to go and see your MP. We've already had explained some of the many defects of this, and I think one of the problems we have is trying to understand the politics. I think the government knows perfectly well what it's doing. The government knows, for instance, that there are 7 placeholder clauses where there is nothing there. They're going to drop them in later. This is extraordinary. I've never seen this. I've only been an MP for 6 years, but talking to colleagues, it's unheard of that you would publish a bill, and I've already started debating it, and it's going through Parliament with 7 major clauses just not there. They still haven't finished the drafting. In my view, this is about the politics of wanting to make a series of ideological gestures, which this government is very fond of doing. When we criticise them and say, but they're breaking international law, they are breaking Article 31 of the Refugee Convention, for instance, but even more peculiarly, clauses 27 to 36 basically interpret the entire convention at the government's whim. And there is the odious clause 12, which creates the 2-tier system, which means that your claim will be judged not on its merits of what you are fleeing from, but the method of transport that you use to arrive here. Now, this is breaking international law, but this government's got form. They've broken international law several times in the last 12 months. And it would not be true to say that we're not holding a mirror up and saying, you're breaking international law right here. Opposition parties, Her Majesty's official opposition, that's the Labour Party, and other opposition parties are pointing this out regularly, so is civil society. This is a government that appears to be, in my view, without any sort of moral compass, but a series of ideological points they wish to make in order to create a situation in which they can continue running the country in this government's particular way. It is quite an extraordinary government. it's very ideologically driven, and they're making a series of points which they want to make. They want to make that point that they can decide on their own immigration system. They want to make the point that they think that small boats crossing the channel is a terrible thing for this country rather than a terrible thing for the people who are on those small boats. They're trying to twist the morals of that by saying, oh, we're doing it to help those people by undermining the traffickers. Well, that would have a lot more credibility if they'd actually done something about undermining the traffickers at source, rather than actually what they're doing, which is turning away the boats, which will harm asylum seekers. There's no credibility there as far as I can see. Now, I think I wanted to give some hope because I wanted to give you a little bit of information about the amendments that we're going to try pushing. We will be pushing amendments on lifting the ban on work so that asylum seekers can work after 6 months. We want to make the service standard of claims being dealt with within 6 months the norm rather than the exception. Over the course of the last 6 years, I've watched this happen myself. At least in my first year, we were able to say to people, your claim will normally be dealt with within 6 months. And it was the exception when it went over that. And that still, the cases still did. It's now the norm. So we want to restore that to the norm. We obviously want to end indefinite detention. We will be putting forward an amendment to limit that to 28 days maximum, but with a presumption that it would be much, much shorter. We want there to be safe and legal routes to get here because, as has already been said, this bill makes a nonsense of this country's proud tradition of welcoming refugees if we don't have safe and legal routes, because effectively what we're doing here is saying all of these people over here can't get here legally. The only people who could get here, as far as I can see, would be coming from France, and the government's already said they don't want that. So the bill doesn't make sense. And I think our problem as campaigners, as well as opposition politics, is trying to argue the government on their own terms is very difficult because their own terms are so bizarre and punitive and there for ideological reasons. They're not there for humanitarian reasons. So we oppose this bill, the Labour Party. I think all opposition parties will be voting against, but as the government has a majority of 79, they will get through what they want to get through. So I echo what's already been said about lobbying your MPs. If it's me, some of you already have, please feel free to continue to do that. But if it's not me, even more, please lobby. The southwest region, the Bristol and Bristol region, there are 5 Labour MPs, 1 Liberal Democrat MP, and all the others are from the government party. And I know many people who've said to me, oh, there's no point lobbying my MP, insert name, a Tory MP. There's just no point. Well, yes, there is, because if you don't tell them how you feel, then they can say genuinely, and they do, and it drives me crazy. In the House of Commons, nobody's written to me protesting about this bill. Now, it matters a lot that you continue to lobby the government party because it's their bill. Lobbying me, we're already going to vote against it. I want to know what you think if I'm your MP, and so do other colleagues. But it's the government party MPs who need to hear from you. So if you've got friends and family in other constituencies, encourage them to say how they feel as well. What will happen next will be the committee line-by-line stage continues after parliamentary recess. So that's the week beginning the 18th of October. It will then come back to the Commons for its final stages. So what's called a report stage and third reading, where we can push further amendments. It will then go to the Lords, where most likely a lot of the amendments that we fail to get through because the government's 79 majority will get through in the Lords. Then what will happen is what's called ping pong, which is a horrible term for a bill going between the Lords and the Commons and then going back to the Lords and back to the Commons. There's a limit to how many times it can do that. In the end, there is a convention, and it makes sense, especially if you believe in democracy and the rule of law. There is a convention. I know that's hard to take when it's this particular government. There's a convention that the Lords can't keep sending things back to the elected House of Commons indefinitely. They have to stop at some point. So whilst I'm absolutely certain that my colleagues in the Lords, working closely with the bishops and the crossbenchers and the independents, will be able to make a lot of wins, they will most likely then get overturned in the Commons if we don't make enough political noise and enough public pressure. So it really, really does matter. I can't guarantee success of the public pressure that we can put to bear on this, but I can guarantee you that if we don't do it, the government will win. So we have to do this. Refugees and asylum seekers deserve better from this country. This country should be, and in my view, most of us rightly are, proud of our sense of identity and of welcoming refugees and asylum seekers. But at the moment, I've got to say, even the way that Afghan refugees are being treated in so-called Operation Warm Welcome is not warm and it's not welcoming. And they're the ones who are here legally. Now, this is an atrocious way to live out the principles of the Refugee Convention that we were proud signatories to in 1951, and we should continue to be proud signatories, supporters of it. This is who we are as a nation. This is who we are as a city and a region, Bristol and Bath. And I support you all in any pressure that you are going to bring, and please do, on every MP in the region and every other piece of lobbying, campaigning, coming to demonstrate outside the House Commons. All of that, please keep up the pressure and please make sure everybody knows what an appalling, absolutely atrocious piece of legislation this is, and what it would do doesn't bear thinking about. But we're going to have to, because we need to stop it from happening. So thank you for listening to me. Thank you very much to STAR and to Freedom from Torture, my great friends, two organisations I spent a lot of time working with when I was chair of the all-party group. It's a real honour to be working with you again.
Thank you so much, Sangam. And finally, we'll be going on to Angela.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for being here today. We have a big fight on our hands. I mean, one of the biggest fights we've had in the last, more than 100 years, because it seems we're going backwards and not forwards. What I'm going to ask, Mark, can you get the slides up so we can just go through what we're going to talk about today? I mean, we're going to we want to see a fairer system. Next slide, please. I think I've already said hi. My name is Angela. I'm giving this presentation on behalf of One Strong Voice. I'll give you more about our details later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. I'm going to give you an idea of who we are and why we set this group up. Next slide, please. Yeah, One Strong Voice is a collective of individuals and organizations based in the UK with direct lived experience of the immigration and asylum system. Our vision is a welcoming system that is non-discriminatory and that treats people with humanity, dignity, and fairness. Next slide, please. One of the things we want to do is to change the narrative. Just like you, we're human beings with hopes and dreams. We need safety for ourselves and for our families. We know that the UK's current asylum system is failing people and is people in need of safety and compassion. We know this because we've experienced it firsthand and we've seen it with our own eyes. The Nationality and Borders Bill that is currently navigating through Parliament introduces the most destructive reforms to an already broken immigration and asylum system that we have ever seen. If it's passed as proposed, the bill will make the situation much more hostile for people seeking sanctuary in the UK. Perhaps this is what the government is aiming at, which will be a direct attack on people's rights to seek asylum, which is a breach of the UK's international obligations. It doesn't have to be this way. We need your support more than ever to ensure that this does not happen. Next slide, please. We completely agree the current UK immigration system is broken and is in need of a complete overhaul. However, the Nationality and Borders Bill is not the answer. That is why we've put together our 7-point plan for a better, fairer, compassionate, and welcoming immigration and asylum system. This is our positive vision for what a welcoming Britain could look like by people who know what it feels like through the broken immigration and asylum system. Next slide, please. Our first point is to ensure that people are able to access refugee protection no matter how they arrived here. While it's preferable that people take safe routes, we know that this is just not possible to do so. People in need of protection should be able to apply for refugee status no matter their journey to safety. An example is the situation in Afghanistan. Even though the government has introduced a resettlement scheme, this can never adequately meet the needs of Afghans who need urgently to leave and get protection and get their claims for international protection heard. Afghanistan refugees who are in imminent danger of Taliban's do not have the luxury to wait to see if the government offers them a resettlement. This is only one example. It is not possible for people to, to access limited, safe, legal routes when they're fleeing for their safety. We know that from my experience, there are just no safe routes that people can take at the moment. Next slide, please. The second thing is that we want to create an accountable immigration and asylum decision-making system free of political interference that is equipped to make the best decision the first time. If they put in place a fairer, more transparent, and more independent system to determine people's applications, applications must have the opportunity for their cases to be dealt with adequately. For example, we're all aware of the Windrush Rush debacle that happened through the maladministration within the government. Applications should have access to high quality legal aid at the first opportunity. Prior to their substantive interviews, this will ensure that, the application process goes through smoothly, and during subsequent fresh claims, they should be treated humanely, and these decisions should be made fast and accurately. So often, people seeking sanctuary are suffering. They're stuck in legal limbo for months, more than years. There are people in my group who had waited like 18 to 20 years battling with the Home Office, due to wrong decisions being made. People seeking sanctuary have become a political tool to push various political narratives. At the end of the day, it is we who are suffering. You know, this is why we call for an accountable immigration system which has fair decision making and is free from political interference. And that way, they would be able to make more quality and efficient decisions in the first place. Next slide, please. Our third proposal on our 7-point plan is to end immigration detention once and for all. Nobody should be detained for immigration purposes. People should be treated in a safe, dignified, and humane way at all times. Immigration detention causes long-lasting impact on people's mental health, a cruel and inhumane practice not having any place in a fair society. We understand that not everybody's application will be successful, but we need a system that respects the humanity of those people who have had their claims denied, and detention must not be part of that system. And next slide, please. The fourth point is to house people seeking asylum within the community so that they can rebuild their lives. People seeking sanctuary are human beings just like everybody else. We need housing that gives us dignity of living in safety. Instead of housing us in offshore camps, half the way around the world, or in the military barracks, or in immigration detention centers, the Nationality Borders Bill proposes to use offshore centers like Ascension Island, which is just over 1 million years old and mostly volcanic waste. It's not for asylum seekers. believe that it's totally inhumane and unworkable and the breach of the UK's international obligations. We entirely oppose the plans to implement offshore detention centers, and we urge you to do the same. We call for safe housing within the community so people can navigate the asylum system and can live in dignity and heal until their claims are processed. Next point, please. Our next point is to create a new refugee integration strategy that starts from day one of arrivals and ensures that local communities thrive. Supporting refugees to rebuild their lives and new futures in Britain is part of their local community, as part of their local communities. Policies should help people ensure their full potential, empowering them to make a positive contribution to their communities through access to work, education, and retraining. This support is necessary while people navigating the system, are waiting for their status to be granted. We're keen to make a positive contribution to our communities and wider society, but the current system has tied our hands and is preventing people from fulfilling their potential participating in local communities. This enriches inequality and the huge contributions that the asylum seekers can make to society. Ultimately, the current system is broken, damaging people. And if they integrate people from day one, they'll become a richer society. And point six, help at least 20,000 refugees per year to find safety and settle in the UK. Currently, there are over 82 million people around the world as of 2020 that are actually refugees. The UK only accepts a small number of people from the world's population. We believe that the UK should play a leading international role in providing sustainable solutions to forced migration, including resettlement of at least 20,000 people. The UK is a welcoming country, and we believe that Britain can welcome more refugees than it's taking right now. We therefore ask them to take at least 20,000 people a year. Next slide, please. And finally, enhancing a refugee family reunion system is very important, so that the family is preserved and kept as one unit. Family is a right, and every human being has a right to have a family. The UK's current policy is keeping families apart. The new Nationality Borders Bill will restrict people from reuniting with their families. And this is something that the government has to understand is going to damage people in the long run. We call for the government to expand, the criteria of who qualifies for family reunion and to have their family members with them. It's really important that people can only rebuild their lives if they're reunited with their family. Next slide, please. In 2020, there were around 6 asylum applications for every 10,000 people living in the UK. Even though the government tries to make it look like they're thousands and thousands, they're not. It's a very small number. And this is just the application. These are not the people who have actually been granted. Most of the time, they reject people, at least half of them, before they have to go through the process again and again before they become successful. Next slide, please. Ultimately, seeking sanctuary is a human right. And at the end of the day, it should not be criminalized. And that's another thing they want to do. Next slide, please. I'd like you to join me in saying no to the Nationality and Borders Bill 2021 in its current state. It's not going to work. It's not going to break a broken system. it's not going to benefit anybody. It's going to be costly for the government, and it's going to be miserable for those seeking asylum. Next slide, please. I'd like to thank you very much for having me here today, and also share with you our paper, which came out today. I don't know if you can see it, but I'll put the link in the chat, which we launched today, which is a parody on the Metro on how we see a more welcoming and more compassionate United Kingdom. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, well, I look forward to answering them. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Angela, and thanks to all our speakers. You've been amazing.